Joining us is energy policy analyst and advisor David Blackman. He's also a senior contributor for Forbes. David, good afternoon. So President Trump has indicated a desire to rebuild Venezuela's oil sector, to bring U.S. oil companies in to get the oil flowing again, to use his words. So looking at some data points, Venezuela was producing over 3 million barrels of oil daily. Now it's at about just shy of 1 million barrels under the socialist regime. So, David, I want to ask you, after the U.S. is done, how much oil do you estimate the country will be able to produce a day?
Well, it's a matter of timing and investment. It's going to require quite a lot of investment, tens of billions of dollars, to revitalize that industry. A lot of the infrastructure is dilapidated and out of date. Will have to be restored to fully operational process. And, you're talking about several years before you can really have a major impact. Typically in a new development, you'd be looking at 5 to 7 years before you ever produced any additional oil. This is not a new development, though. The fields in Venezuela are mature basins. They've all been produced for decades. And so this is a matter of fixing and revitalizing existing infrastructure. So within, say, 2 years, you could conceivably add several 100,000 barrels of oil per day additional to what already is being produced onto the market. To get it back over 3 million a day is probably a 5 to 7 year process involving billions, tens of billions of dollars in new investment.
Okay, I want to ask you about how energy companies feel about going back to Venezuela. But first, could you just talk to us about how did this dramatic decrease in oil production happen?
Well, in 2007, Hugo Chavez was the predecessor to Nicolas Maduro as the president of Venezuela. He was a socialist who was first elected in the late 1990s to lead the country. And as part of his socialist revolution in 2007, he came in and offered revised lease terms to the U.S. and other international companies who were operating there. Previously, before that, companies like ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, Chevron were the operators of these fields with majority interests in those fields. And the national oil company, which is called PDVSA, owned a minority non-operating interest, typically around 40%. So it was about a 60-40 split. Just as on a typical agreement. The Chavez government came in and said, look, you're going to have to settle for minority stakes in these fields now, and PDVSA is going to become the operator. Chevron decided, okay, we'll take that risk. We'll try to stay in the country because there's so much production there. They thought the potential rewards outweighed the risk. ConocoPhillips, ExxonMobil, and other companies said, no, we're not going to take that risk. We don't believe PDVSA is really capable of operating all of these fields. And they were right about that. And so at that time, by then, production had fallen to slightly under 3 million barrels a day. And of course, since then, it's down below 1 million, as we see. The company, unfortunately, PDVSA used to be a very robust, highly regarded national oil company. But of course, you've had all this outward migration, collapse of the education system in Venezuela because of the socialist government. And so you end up with a company that's really not capable of conducting these operations.
So you said ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, and the like didn't really, they didn't like the risk-reward proposition back then. How do they feel about it right now? Because the companies, American energy firms, they have yet to say if they want to return to Venezuela to rebuild or not. I mean, you said earlier, it's a big undertaking requiring significant investment. Do you think the companies are being cautious? Do they need more clarity before making big moves? How are they feeling?
Well, I have to believe, first of all, that we wouldn't have put the president of the United States in that press conference last Saturday to say the things he said unless advanced discussions had already been held with those companies, first of all. Second, big projects like this with multi-billion-dollar investments are in the DNA at ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, Chevron, and other big multinational companies. Look at what ExxonMobil has done in neighboring Guyana. They've invested $60 billion in their own capital, 45% operating interest in that big offshore field. Now they've got it up producing almost 1 million barrels a day. This is what ExxonMobil does. Chevron is a minority owner in that very same project. This is what Chevron does. ConocoPhillips, same way. Shell, BP, all of these companies, these big projects with enormous potential rewards are what they do all over the world. So I don't think there's any reluctance for them to take on the projects. They have to get some assurance of stability of government going forward. And I think that's a big piece of what the Trump administration has been working to provide this week so far. And I believe that we come out of that meeting on Friday. I know there's a meeting between the president and CEOs of many of these companies. And I think after that meeting, we're going to see probably some messaging that says, yes, these companies are willing to go back in there under certain conditions, of course, and assurances from the U.S. government that they're going to do what they can to promote stability there in the region.
So Chevron is the major U.S. company in Venezuela still, as you talked about earlier as well. What is the situation with Chevron right now? How does this development impact the company? Does it stand to benefit?
Oh, sure. I think so, because even Chevron lost some of its leasehold back in 2007. You know, they didn't maintain everything they were already involved in down there. And so they stand to benefit from some restored access to additional acreage and projects. And these other companies, of course, they challenged the Chavez rewriting of the contracts that they had been operating under and won judgments in arbitration, international arbitration courts. So they stand also to benefit from the payment of the damages they sought in those arbitration cases as well. So, you know, it could be a pretty good windfall for those companies as well, although you have to wonder how the Venezuelan government is actually going to fund repayment of those debts. And we haven't seen those details yet from the administration.
Okay, David, just one final question. How do you think the U.S.'s move here is going to impact global energy prices?
It won't have any immediate impact. I think prices have softened just a little bit here this week, but not much. Because you're not going to really see major new volumes coming onto the market until at least 2027 at the earliest. Right now, we're not going to see any softening in prices directly attributable to this. But as those new volumes come online, you certainly could see that. And if they're really substantial volumes coming online, you know, in the nearer term, then of course it could be very significant. So we'll just have to wait and see how that develops. The global market on which oil prices are set is so complex. You know, I'm always really reluctant to try to predict anything beyond a week or so.
Okay, well, David, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate you talking to us today.
Thank you.
Nationwide protests in Iran enter the 11th day as demonstrators issue a direct appeal to President Trump. Human rights groups report dozens killed and mass arrests as unrest spreads. More news after this break.